The first wave is pinned to the shingle at Omaha. Radios spit static, officers shout without answers, the water goes red, and someone yells over the gunfire, "Where are the tanks?" A destroyer shells so close its spray hits the beach. Men claw at sand that behaves like glue. The line bends, it's almost game over the final whistle. Meanwhile, a few dozen miles inland, elite German panzers sit fueled and ready. Engines cold because one signature hasn't arrived. The authorization is locked behind a sleeping dictator and a split command. One mistake kept that hammer on the table. You're about to see it. To understand why the counterblow never landed, we need to go back to the German map rooms. There are two power poles in the same grid, OKW in Berlin and OB West in France. Both claim the line. That split, strategy hoarded by Hitler, operations executed by Rundstedt and Rommel, meant the fastest units couldn't move without a call from the top. The stakes were simple and brutal. The Allied foothold was fragile. Hours mattered. If German armor reached the beaches by midday, the invaders could have been shoved back into the channel. Not theory, doctrine. Blitzkrieg only works when speed becomes shock. The Germans still had speed and steel. They lacked permission. Here's the structure that failed. The best armored formations in the West, Panzerlehr and 12th SS Hitlerjugend, weren't in Rommel's hand. They were in Hitler's strategic reserve, which meant nobody moved them without his explicit go-ahead. Rundstedt argued for keeping armor back to strike a concentrated counterattack once the main landing was known. Rommel wanted tanks close to the waterline to smash the enemy on the beach. They never resolved that argument. Hitler kept the key, so to speak. Now add timing. Rommel wasn't at his command post on the morning of June 6th. He'd gone to inspect the Atlantic Wall and, crucially, believed the rough weather meant no landing. He left to see his wife for her birthday. That absence didn't cause the paralysis, but it amplified it. With Rommel away, with Rundstedt cautious, the only lever that mattered sat on Hitler's nightstand. And he slept. Staff officers in the Chancellery and at OKW hesitated to wake him. The habit was ingrained. Hitler held release authority, and waking him with incomplete information risked rage and reversal. While Allied destroyers risked grounding to fire point-blank at emplacements, Panzerlehr's mechanics checked tracks and waited. The 12th SS listened to scattered reports, paratroopers inland, ships offshore, beaches smoking, and waited. Meanwhile, local German commanders did what soldiers do when doctrine freezes. They counterattacked with what they had. Grenadier battalions probed forward. A few assault guns pushed toward the exits off the beaches. It was brave and often suicidal. Without mass, without synchronized artillery and armor, those stabs bled out under naval guns that could throw a 14-inch shell into any moving column spotted in daylight. The 21st Panzer Division, the one armored hammer actually within reach of Sword and Juno, found a narrow seam and pushed. For a moment, their reconnaissance elements glimpsed the sea. But Allied air power shredded the roads behind them, and naval gunfire pinned any attempt to broaden the thrust. The division stalled in a no-man's land of orchards and burning vehicles. What nobody knew in those first hours was how much the delay mattered. Each minute bought the Allies more than breath. It bought engineering. Bulldozers cleared obstacles, beach exits opened, anti-tank guns dug in. By late morning, even at Omaha, fragments coalesced into units with radios that finally connected. The window for a decisive armored punch was closing with every crate of ammunition dragged off a landing craft. This was the moment everything changed, not on the shoreline, but in a bureaucracy that couldn't move its heaviest pieces when the board demanded it. While the tanks idled, another hand pressed on the brake. Belief. The German High Command didn't just need permission to move, they needed certainty about where to move. And the Allies fed them a steady diet of lies. Operation Fortitude South built a ghost. The first U.S. Army group, FUSAG, existed on paper, in radio ether, and on film reels of inflatable Shermans. They parked dummy landing craft in English estuaries and let aerial reconnaissance drink it in. Real signalers hammered fake radio nets night after night, simulating traffic from divisions that weren't there. And they cast the perfect lead actor. George Patton, the Allied commander the Germans feared most, left conspicuously idle in southeast England, pointing conveniently at the Pas de Calais. The reason? It's how you anchor a lie. Calais was the shortest crossing, the most obvious target, and the best defended. If you're German intelligence and you already assume the Allies will strike there, Fortitude doesn't need to invent a fantasy. It just needs to confirm your bias. Every intercepted scrap, every fuzzy photograph, every rumor of Patton's movements fed the same conclusion. Normandy might be a feint. Now layer on weather. A North Atlantic front rolled in on June 4th to 5th. Allied meteorologists reading subtle breaks told Eisenhower there was a narrow window on the 6th. German forecasters called it a no-go. Commanders went off station. Rommel drove inland. Many coastal units relaxed posture from full alert to watchful waiting. When the reports of airborne drops came in before dawn, scattered lights, shoots in hedgerows, German staff could file it under nuisance raids designed to pull attention from the real blow at Calais. This is where deception meets friction. The 15th Army, guarding Pas de Calais, stayed put. Orders held them in place because OKW believed a second, larger landing was still coming. Fortitude had embedded one crucial expectation. Even if there's an assault in Normandy, the decisive attack will fall later, up the coast. Therefore, don't strip Calais. Therefore, don't release the hammer. Meanwhile, Allied air supremacy turned move at daylight into a death wish. Rail yards across northern France were already cratered by the transportation plan. Weeks of relentless bombing that didn't just break tracks, it mangled switches, signals, and repair crews. Bridges vanished. Marshalling yards looked like chewed tin. Luftwaffe fighter cover? Thin. Pilots were scarce, fuel scarcer. So even when orders trickled out, units like Panzer Lehr and 12th SS faced a practical problem. You can't mass where you can't travel. And Fortitude kept whispering. Intercepts and double agents. Think of the replete network around the double-cross system. Continued to report that Patton's Phantom Army was ready to pounce on Calais once the Allies had drawn German armor south. In other words, if you counterattack Normandy too hard, you'll open the door for the real invasion. Hold back. Wait. This decision would haunt them because the hours it stole were the only hours that mattered. Here's where it gets grimly ironic. On the beaches, Allied troops weren't invincible. At Omaha, they were pinned, mauled, dead as a dodo in some sectors. But in German map rooms, the picture looked manageable. Reports were conflicting, the weather was wrong, and the big threat, Calais, remained fixed in their minds like a magnet. So the 15th Army didn't move. The strongest reserves waited. And the counterstroke that doctrine demanded never assembled. One more twist. The German system prized obedience over initiative at the strategic level. With deception reinforcing caution and Hitler's personal control freezing authorization, competent commanders couldn't risk a bold redeployment without explicit orders. Fortitude didn't need to fool every officer. It only needed to keep the top from saying go. And it did. Meanwhile, something else was happening. Even released armor crawled. Train after train didn't arrive. Columns took farm tracks at night, engines coughing, crews tense under skies that belonged to the enemy. The delay wasn't just mental fog, it was real fog. Smoke, rain, dust. And the Phantom armies installed the wrong lighthouse in German minds. They were steering by a lie. Now it was time to take action. Except the infrastructure had been eviscerated. A counterattack isn't just steel and will, it's roads, fuel, and timing. The Germans had the tanks. The roads wouldn't cooperate. Allied interdiction did its work early. Rail lines north of the Seine looked like open wounds. Rails twisted, ties charred, rolling stock stranded. Road junctions were cratered with neat, surgical precision. The kind of cuts that don't just slow you, they force you to detour miles through hedgerows and farm lanes. Engineers hustled to fill holes. By day, fighter-bombers hunted them. By night, columns crept with hoods over headlights, listening for the snarl of a P-47 and the whistle of rockets. Fuel starved the punch. Panzers drink. Tank transporters drink more. With depots hit and bridges down, supply officers rationed movement. That meant drip feed arrivals, 2 tanks here, a company there, exactly the opposite of what you need to break a beachhead. The result wasn't a hammer, it was gravel thrown at a wall. Communications made it worse. Radio nets were short-ranged and congested, and in some sectors jammed. Wire lines, reliable in theory, ran through ditches that had been churned by bombs and tank tracks. Cut, rerun. Cut again. Commanders were blind. Orders went out late or contradicted each other, crossing like ghosts on the line. You can't mass artillery without a shared clock. You can't coordinate armor without an agreed axis. So, local commanders acted on fragments. A battalion commander spotted a breach and lunged. An assault gun battery received an order to support infantry at a crossroads that didn't exist anymore because the crossroads had been turned into a lunar crater. They advanced anyway because orders are orders. Naval gunfire punished every exposed movement. Imagine a 14-inch shell, over half a ton of steel and explosives, dropping into a hedgerow where a company-sized element tried to form up. The blast doesn't just kill, it scatters. It erases timing. Coastal batteries looked imposing, but their doctrine betrayed them. Guns were sighted to rake ships, not tanks. Limited traverse meant they could fire out to sea with murderous accuracy, but struggled to pivot inland. Pre-sighted? Sure, on the water. Once Allied infantry breached the seawall, those emplacements became bunkers with blind spots. Air and naval suppression pounded them. When they did fire inland, counter-battery found them fast. Here's a micro-story. A German adjutant crouches by a field phone outside a hedgerow HQ, handset pressed to his ear, hearing only dead hiss. He sends 2 runners. One doesn't come back. The other arrives at a regimental CP that is already displaced a mile south. By the time he returns with revised orders, the target has moved, the enemy has dug in, and the window he was supposed to hit has already closed. Meanwhile, Allied logistics ran the opposite direction, forward, relentless, methodical. Beachmasters cleared lanes with bulldozers, engineers blew gaps through obstacles, MPs hand-signaled traffic as if it were a city rush hour. Within hours, exits off the beaches hardened with crushed stone and steel matting. Anti-tank guns took up positions covering likely approaches. The first self-propelled artillery pieces rolled ashore and began to register targets inland. Every 30 minutes, the lodgment got teeth. German armor that did probe found kill zones carefully prepared by necessity. Bazooka teams and Payat crews lay in ditches. Forward observers called in destroyers that stood so close to shore their hulls scraped sand. Air cover roamed overhead, key to radio calls from spotters who finally had stable nets. The longer the Germans waited for orders, the more the battlefield tilted against any daylight movement. There was one more problem: terrain. The bocage, thick hedgerows with earthen banks, broke sightlines into bite-sized fields. Tanks hate that. You can't exploit speed when every 100 meters is a blind corner and every lane funnels you into a kill pocket. The Germans knew the bocage, but they didn't control the air or the initiative. That meant each push became a reconnaissance by death. Put it together, deception told the Germans to wait. Weather told them to relax. Command said, hold. Roads broke. Radios failed. Guns faced the wrong way. By the time authorizations arrived, the counterattack required to throw an army into the sea needed perfect timing and mass. What they had was fragments, courageous, costly, and doomed under the weight of steel coming off those beaches. Hitler finally says, go. Too late. 21st Panzer lunges, then buckles under ships and typhoons. By dawn, Lehr and 12th SS arrive mauled. The lodgment has teeth. The door locks. Victory hinged on German paralysis, not Allied perfection. For the ground-level horror that almost erased it, watch our companion piece next. Subscribe, share your thoughts, and please don't die on us.